The sun dips low over the Egyptian coast, casting a broad, golden haze that rolls in like a blanket across the sprawling, bustling city of Alexandria. From the busy harbor to the marble terraces of hillside villas, the light touches everything, muting shadows, warming stone, and setting the sea aglow with a shimmering reflection of fire and gold. Seagulls cry and wheel overhead in lazy arcs, drifting on the salt breeze. Down at the wharf, ships from all corners of the Mediterranean sway gently at anchor, their sails neatly furled and ropes creaking softly in the evening wind. Crew members move with calm purpose, finishing their final tasks of the day, securing cargo, checking knots, and laughing in quiet tones before night takes full hold. And as the daylight fades into soft indigo, the crown jewel of Alexandria, the magnificent library, rises above the city like a monument to human thought. Its tall silhouette, all columns and domes and intricate carvings, is etched against the darkening sky. It seems almost otherworldly in its stillness, a temple not to gods but to ideas. By day, the Library of Alexandria is a whirlwind of energy, an organized chaos of activity. Scholars from across the known world shuffle through its halls, Greek philosophers in flowing robes, Egyptian priests adorned in linen and beads, scribes clutching bundles of parchment, and messengers darting between chambers with news or scrolls. But now, as night takes hold, the rhythm slows. The vast courtyards grow quiet. The laughter of the philosophers is replaced by the soft murmuring of leaves, and the only footsteps are those of the few who remain, drawn in by the spell of knowledge too enticing to abandon even for sleep. The outer courtyard is a vision of serene beauty, framed by colonnades of marble pillars lined with carefully tended palms, and paved in gleaming stone worn smooth by centuries of use. The air is heavy with the scent of jasmine, orange blossom, and brine from the sea. Torches flicker to life along the perimeter, casting pools of warm light on the walkways and statues of Athena, Thoth, and Hermes. A gentle breeze glides in from the coast, refreshing and light, stirring the papyrus fronds overhead with a delicate rustle, like soft whispering in a language only the old gods understand. Inside the library, the atmosphere is reverent. It is a sanctuary built of stone and scroll where time seems to slow. High walls rise on every side, lined from floor to vaulted ceiling with wooden shelves, crafted from fragrant cedar and sturdy cypress. Scrolls are wrapped in linen, bound with wax or clay seals, and stacked with obsessive precision. Some are so ancient that their papyrus fibers crumble at the edges. Others are still damp with fresh ink, written just days earlier by quick-handed scribes under the supervision of master copyists. Bronze oil lamps hang at regular intervals, their flames small but steady. The light they cast dances across the walls, throwing long, flickering shadows over murals and mosaics that depict a pantheon of thinkers and sages. Hermes Trismegistus inscribing a tablet by starlight, Plato in deep discussion beneath olive trees, and ancient priests aligning obelisks with the stars. The stillness is almost sacred. A few scholars remain this late. These are no ordinary visitors. They are here by special favor, permitted to stay after sunset either because they have traveled long distances or because they are perched on the edge of discovery. A bearded man from Cyrene reads from a scroll that catalogs medicinal herbs found along the Nile, his eyes flickering with curiosity. A priest from Heliopolis, wrapped in ivory-colored robes, murmurs astronomical calculations under his breath, tracing star patterns on a wax tablet and comparing them to charts etched into stone nearby. Their minds are lit brighter than the lamps around them. Near the center of the library, a scribe barely out of boyhood sits hunched at a small wooden table, his reed pen moving carefully across parchment. He copies a complex philosophical text, each symbol drawn with exacting precision. His ink, made from soot, gum, and water, glistens under the soft glow of his lamp. His lips move silently, repeating the words as he transcribes them, anchoring them to memory. Nearby, a teacher guides a student through the principles of rhetoric. The teacher speaks fluent Greek. The student answers in hesitant but clear Coptic. It is a quiet dialogue, filled with pauses for thought. Here in Alexandria, such mingling of cultures is not just common, it is expected. The library is far more than a building. It is a sprawling complex, a living, breathing center of inquiry and knowledge. It includes lecture halls filled with echoing voices, gardens arranged in precise geometric patterns, shrines to gods of learning and writing, and even a communal dining space where debate continues over clay bowls of lentils and goblets of watered wine. Some whisper that the library now holds more than 700,000 scrolls. Others scoff at the idea, insisting the real number is unknowable, constantly in flux. What is certain is that knowledge arrives daily. Every ship that docks in the harbor is expected to surrender its written works, whether trade records, maps, or philosophical texts. These are quickly copied by a dedicated team of scribes. The copies are stored and the originals returned, unless they are deemed too precious. In such cases, the library simply keeps them. Tonight, the head librarian, an older man with a stooped back and ink-stained fingers, climbs the upper gallery steps. He holds a torch and moves slowly, inspecting the rarest scrolls with care. His gaze lingers on a shelf of Babylonian astronomical charts, then moves to fragments of Indian poetry, and finally to a sealed cabinet that holds scrolls inscribed in scripts no one has yet deciphered. He lays a hand gently on the cabinet's frame. These scrolls hold secrets no one alive can read, but here they rest, waiting for the day someone can. He moves on, lost in thought. Outside, Alexandria is quieting. Lanterns glow in the windows of stone villas, and the sound of the streets softens to a hum. The marketplaces are empty, the temples locked. Only the library remains fully alive. But its life is different now. Slower, deeper. It hums, not with sound, but with presence. The hush of its chambers is not emptiness, but density, the weight of accumulated wisdom. This place is not merely for learning. It is a cathedral of memory, a bastion against time. In a world where wars rage, dynasties fall, and cities are razed to dust, the Library of Alexandria stands as humanity's boldest attempt to defy forgetting. And on this quiet, sea-scented night, it endures, silent, glowing, and brilliantly alive. In the chilly gray pre-dawn that blankets northern Italy, the city of Ravenna stirs in muffled tones. Streets lie damp with dew, their cobbled stones darkened from a night's moisture, and the heavy hush of early morning presses against the tiled rooftops of this once proud imperial seat. Centuries earlier, Ravenna had been the capital of the Western Roman Empire, its palaces and cathedrals thrumming with the heartbeat of an empire. But now, in the year 476 A.D., the city wakes under very different circumstances. The banners that once bore the eagle of Rome now droop in the still air, faded and tattered. There are soldiers in the streets, but they are not the disciplined legions of Caesar or Trajan. These are mercenaries, Heruli warriors mostly, hired swords, in the service of a world unraveling. The early light casts long shadows through the narrow alleys, where shopkeepers unlatch wooden shutters with slow hands. Bread ovens are rekindled. The scent of yeast and ash mingles with the damp air as a baker's apprentice stokes the embers beneath a stone hearth. Chickens shuffle inside wicker pens, and a dog barks in the distance, sharp, lonely, and unanswered. Ravenna's market stalls are still cloaked in tarps, their wares unseen, but even when the sun lifts fully, the goods on offer will be fewer than in years past. Trade routes have become risky, taxes high, and confidence low. coins stamped with Roman emperors no longer inspire trust. Bartering has returned. A basket of onions might now fetch more than a silver denarius. In a villa on the outskirts of the city, Orestes, the imperial father of the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus, stands at a window wrapped in wool, staring toward the sea. He has not slept. The winds have shifted. He feels it in his joints and in his gut. Ravenna, once a jewel of the Adriatic, is no longer safe. He hears the footsteps of betrayal drawing near. Odoacer, the Germanic general his court had once relied upon, now moves against them. Reports say he comes with a sizable force. The Roman army, weakened and fractured, cannot resist. Orestes closes his eyes and whispers a prayer, not for victory, but for mercy. Within the walls of Ravenna's modest palace, Romulus Augustulus sleeps. He is a child in years and in stature, thrust into a role meant for giants. His room is simple: a carved bed draped in furs, a stool, a cedar chest with his few belongings. On the stone wall above his bed, a fading fresco of the goddess Roma watches over him. It is cracked and peeling, like everything else. The boy stirs beneath his covers but does not wake. He dreams of horses running free across green fields. He dreams of nothing imperial. Outside, the city gates remain shut, though sentries fidget at their posts, murmuring among themselves in Latin peppered with Gothic and Illyrian. They talk of Odoacer's march. They speak softly of what happens to emperors when the tides of power shift. Some of them clutch tokens of protection, crosses, rings, bits of bone. Others say little at all. They have seen too much, and they know silence is safest. At the church of San Vitale, a few cloaked figures kneel on cold stone. The church is vast and echoing, its domed ceiling catching the first gold streaks of morning light. Incense hangs in the air like ancient mist. A priest, gaunt and weathered, intones a prayer for the safety of the city. His voice rises into the cavernous heights, hopeful but thin. No congregation answers him. Elsewhere in the city, aristocrats drink their wine earlier than usual. Conversations behind closed doors turn toward escape. Some consider bribes. Others prepare carts. Servants are sent to fetch what valuables remain. Families whisper plans in candlelight. To flee to Constantinople, to retreat to estates in the countryside, or to simply vanish before Odoacer's men arrive. But there is no panic, not yet. Rome has fallen before, they say, many times, and always it stood again. Always it found a way. That is the mythology of Rome: resilience in decline, rebirth through ruin. Yet something in the air today feels different. The quiet is heavier, the dread more certain. The Empire's last day in the West will not be marked with fire or siege, but with a strange calm, the unsettling kind that settles over a land when even the birds fall silent. Soon, a rider will arrive bearing a message. Soon, Odoacer will stand before the gates. But for now, the city exhales, one slow final breath before history changes forever. In the late morning haze, beyond the low, rolling hills of Ravenna, the rustling of wind through olive trees gently stirs the still fields, their silence broken only by the soft chittering of cicadas and the distant clatter of cartwheels. The sun, weak and filtered by a dull gauze of late summer clouds, casts a pale gold shimmer across the Adriatic countryside. Along the Via Popilia, a few carts creak wearily toward the aging city, laden not with imperial treasures or tribute, but with firewood, rough sacks of grain, and the scattered, weary remnants of a rural world slowly slipping into decline. A couple of farmers, their cloaks patched and dusty, coax tired oxen forward. Their eyes sweep the road and the sky beyond, listening more to rumor than reason. Some say Odoacer's army is already within a day's march. Others claim he has stopped to negotiate. But no one expects mercy. Not anymore. Inside Ravenna, daily life continues, but only barely. The city's stone streets, once swept clean by the feet of senators and merchants, are uneven with age, puddles lingering in the crevices between cracked paving stones. A blacksmith stands by his forge, rhythmically grinding a blade, not in preparation for battle, but out of habit, as if the ritual of sharpening were the only thing left to give shape to the day. A woman, her sleeves soaked from scrubbing, empties a bucket of dishwater out her upper window into the alley below. The splash startles a stray cat, which darts away, pursued by a barefoot boy laughing and shouting, oblivious to the slow-motion collapse of the world around him. The city's amphitheater, once thunderous with voices and spectacle, now stands hollow and haunted. Its proud arches crumble, claimed by ivy and birds. Weeds break through the ancient masonry. The cheers, the blood, the triumphs of Rome's brutal entertainments are long faded into memory. Gladiator combat has been banned for generations, and no new spectacles have risen to take its place. The city's theater lies locked and shuttered, its stage dark, its seats gathering dust. No patrons come. There are no more coins for art. In the last functioning forum, a few philosophers linger like fading embers of thought. Cloaked and aging, they quote Cicero and Seneca not for the benefit of crowds, but to comfort one another, as if, by repeating the wisdom of better days, they might illuminate the path out of decline. But they know better. Their debates are not of law or strategy anymore, but of fate, of collapse, of dignity in the face of powerlessness. They no longer hope to preserve Rome. They only try to understand why it had to end. In the grand public baths, once a symbol of civic pride and imperial hygiene, only a trickle of visitors remains. The air is humid, but the water is no longer reliably hot. The marble has chipped and dulled. Two elderly senators sit in shoulder-deep pools, their discussions punctuated by long silences. One remembers the campaigns of Valentinian III, his voice trailing into nostalgia. The other stares at the water and wonders aloud if the emperors of the East still remember that Ravenna even exists. Above these quiet remnants in the city's oldest churches, mosaics still catch and reflect what little light the day gives. Gold tiles glint faintly, halos shimmer around saints and martyrs. Christ Pantocrator gazes down with still serenity from the domed ceiling as incense curls upward in quiet chapels nearly emptied of worshippers. Faith remains, not as a rallying cry, but as a kind of whisper against the dark, a final recourse for a city running out of gods. In the dusty southern barracks, a group of soldiers go through the motions of drill. Their movements are slow, their armor dented and mismatched, Roman in name, but no longer Roman in reality. Some wear old crests, others carry shields looted from battles fought far from the ideals of the Republic. Their centurion, voice hoarse and tired, barks orders with the force of memory rather than conviction. They laugh between commands. But it's not real laughter. It's the laughter of men who have nothing left to lose. Down at the harbor, a merchant oversees the loading of a river barge bound for points east. Bolts of silk, sacks of wool, dried figs. His final investment in a trade that no longer thrives. He watches as his goods are packed aboard, glancing once more toward the city that raised him, disappointed him, and now, perhaps, will die without him. He does not speak farewell. He simply turns and boards. As the sun approaches its apex, the mood within Ravenna shifts, tightens, becomes brittle. From high towers and windswept ridgelines, scouts watch the horizon. Dust rises like a curtain over the distant road. Some say they see banners there, flapping in the breeze. A boar, a dragon, a figure of war. They belong to Odoacer, the Germanic general whose army is no longer coming. It is almost here. In the imperial palace, the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus stirs. He's no longer asleep. but not truly awake. He sits at a small table in a high chamber, a scroll of Virgil unrolled before him. He stares at it, eyes unfocused. He is aware vaguely that his reign is ending, that the empire he was meant to lead has already crumbled around him. He does not cry, nor shout, nor pray. He watches a beetle crawl slowly across the stones beneath his feet. The insect, at least, moves with purpose. In another wing of the palace, Orestes, father of the boy emperor and former general, receives the latest message from his forward scouts. He reads it once, then again. He nods. There will be no reinforcements, no surprise rescue from Constantinople, no rallying of troops in Gaul. He sends away his advisors. There is no more to plan. And so, the people of Ravenna wait. They do not cower. They do not prepare for battle. They simply wait. The rituals of Rome, the Senate's proceedings, the imperial titles, the coinage stamped with emperors' faces, have grown hollow. Yet they held on to them, long after the substance was gone. Now, as the roads quake under the march of a foreign army once labeled barbarian, they brace not with anger, but with acceptance. What must fall, falls. The last light of the Western Roman Empire dims without explosion or outcry. No trumpet marks its death. No legion defends its soul. It fades with murmurs, in silence, in the slow turning of 1,000 backs away from an idea whose time has passed. Atop the weather-worn wooden ramparts of Ravenna, a guard narrows his gaze into the dusty haze of the western horizon. His hand, calloused and trembling, shields his eyes against the low afternoon sun. The iron of his helmet, once a proud testament to Rome's military splendor, is now dull and mottled with rust. His red tunic, faded almost to brown, flutters against his ribs in the wind. Behind him, the city seems to sigh, its breath slow and shallow. As the guard squints at the faint, growing smear of dust rising from the distant road, he murmurs a prayer under his breath. It is not to Jupiter, nor to Christ, but to any spirit, any forgotten god or saint or whisper of the divine that might delay what's coming. He does not hope for victory. He hopes only for another quiet hour. Along the perimeter wall, another sentry fusses with a frayed knot in the cracked leather of his belt. The tower beneath his boots groans faintly when he shifts his weight. Its stones misaligned, its mortar chipped and flecked with moss. Each winter deepens the damage. Each summer bakes the cracks wider. He glances to his companion, and they exchange no words. They do not need to. For weeks, they've stared out over the same gray fields and tired sky. Every hour bleeds indistinctly into the next, marked only by the rhythm of waiting, the clink of armor as someone stretches, the dry hiss of the breeze through brittle weeds, the creak of wood that nobody repairs. Beyond the walls, the fields of Ravenna are hushed and heavy with neglect. Thin, ragged lines of autumn wheat stretch toward a horizon that promises nothing. A lone scarecrow slumps drunkenly in an untended plot, one arm collapsed, its tunic fluttering like a surrendered flag. The farmlands that once fed the city now grow only fear. Farmers have driven their goats and sheep eastward, closer to the coast, where the ships still sail. The others, those with less or those who feared more, have locked their doors, buried their seed grain, and vanished into the hills. Just inside the walls in the artisan quarter, the silence deepens. The tannery, once billowing with steam and acid stink, now breathes only weakly. Most of the looms are silent. In a dark shed, a lone cobbler hammers a sole onto a worn boot, the motion steady, almost meditative, as though rhythm might hold off collapse. The tile workshops, once echoing with the sharp tap of glass on stone, are dim. In one corner, a master artisan brushes dust from a half-formed mosaic of Theodosius. The face is missing. He does not lay more tiles. Instead, He watches the empty space, as if trying to remember what a future once looked like. Down the sloping lane, under the shadow of a Roman forum, long repurposed and remodeled, a market stumbles through its morning. Only a few stalls remain. Most vendors have disappeared or taken their best wares to trade with passing caravans. What remains smells of vinegar and smoke. The fish are small, some already beginning to sour. A potter with tired eyes barters her last intact amphora for a thin bolt of linen. Neither buyer nor seller speaks. Even haggling feels too extravagant. A short distance away, inside an old marble temple now converted to a humble church, a priest speaks Latin into the emptiness. The sanctuary echoes each syllable with weary reverence. His cassock is worn through at the cuffs. The beeswax candle sputters in its holder. His sermon is not of glory or salvation, but of humility. Not of Rome's rise, but of its fading. Blessed are the meek, he intones, his voice thin but steady. Only a few parishioners listen, heads bowed, more from habit than hope. At the palace gate, 2 guards linger in formation, more from memory than command. Their spears are upright, but their shoulders slump. One scratches at a flea bite, the other watches a pigeon methodically peck between the marble cracks. Behind them, the halls of the palace are dim and quiet. Servants move like ghosts, pages with trays of untouched food, scribes transcribing orders that will never be issued, maids polishing balustrades that no one will climb. The palace was designed to embody the idea of empire. Now, it is a mausoleum. A child darts along the portico's colonnade, barefoot and laughing, a carved wooden horse clutched in his hand. His footsteps echo down the corridor. His mother emerges from a doorway and calls softly after him, her voice unhurried. She knows he will come back. There is nowhere else to run. In the quiet of the imperial study, the chamberlain reviews the daily register. The handwriting is careful, the ink fresh, the appointments hollow. An audience that will never convene, a feast for guests who will never arrive, a tribute from provinces long overrun. He places the pen beside the open book, leans back, and exhales. Somewhere far off, faint and measured, comes the sound of hooves. No horns sound, no alarms, no hurried feet. Ravenna continues to breathe. The city has made its peace with waiting. The pulse of an empire that once ruled the known world now beats slow and faint beneath stones worn thin by centuries. A new world waits just beyond the walls, patient and inevitable. The morning mist clings heavily to the outer canals of Ravenna, layering the stagnant waters with a thick shroud that makes the entire world appear drowsy and distant, as though seen through the half-closed eyes of sleep. A fisherman, shoulders hunched and skin worn like old leather, hauls up a limp net from the brownish shallows, revealing little more than a few sluggish crabs and a tangle of dead river weeds. He exhales with a long, hollow sound, not of frustration, but of the weary acceptance that blooms when expectation has long since withered. The dock beneath his feet creaks ominously, each step met with the complaint of ancient salt-swollen wood, warped and riddled with damp rot. Boats, once the proud carriers of trade and ambition, now sit tethered like senile beasts of burden, their hulls coated in algae, their sails stiff and useless with age. No wind has stirred them for days. Just beyond the dock, a gaunt merchant cloaked in layers of threadbare wool stands beside a crate of shriveled olives and pickled onions. His stall was once a lively point of commerce, where goods from the farthest corners of the empire converged. Garlic braided from the fields of Apulia, copper-green wine casks from the Dalmatian coast, sweet figs pressed and packed from the orchards near Carthage. Now, he stands alone, his hands buried in his sleeves to ward off the chill, watching the few townspeople who shuffle past with their eyes fixed on the broken cobblestones, walking not with purpose, but with the slow gait of people who have forgotten what purpose feels like. His only customer that morning is a stray dog who sniffs the crate, then wanders off. Further inland, behind cracked archways and beneath sagging wooden beams, the mosaic floor of a once majestic bathhouse gleams faintly through pools of rainwater. The vibrant patterns, scenes of gods and rivers rendered in thousands of colored tiles, are warped and dulled by time and the shifting weight of neglect. Rain drips from holes in the ceiling, dappling the water with ripples that never quite disappear. A stray dog laps at one of the puddles before curling into the hollow base of a fallen column, now its den. No smoke rises from the caldarium. No laughter or idle gossip drifts through the air. The warmth that once defined the place has long since fled. In what remains of the city's administrative quarter, silence has replaced the scribble of quills and the shuffling of leather-bound sandals. Rooms once filled with bustling clerks now echo with the lonely scratch of a single record keeper who continues his duty not out of obligation, but out of habit. His beard is long and unkempt, his robes patched at the elbows, and his inkpot nearly dry. He notes the remissions of tax from villages now empty, his fingers trembling slightly with age. There are no more messengers, no magistrates. He knows in some quiet part of his mind that the ledgers he so carefully updates are read by no one. Yet he continues, not because he expects the empire to notice, but because he has forgotten how to stop. A hunched crone ambles through the narrow back alleys, her path weaving in and out of broken stone and crumbling mortar. Her face is a map of deep-set wrinkles, eyes sharp despite her frailty. Her breath fogs in the morning air as she murmurs incantations to herself, not loud enough for others, but just enough to feel heard. In her gnarled hands, she carries a satchel of dried sage and rue, herbs once part of a healer's kit, but now more talisman than medicine. She's survived 3 emperors, perhaps more, and remembers parades of soldiers through Ravenna's gates when spirits were high and banners still held their color. These days, she avoids the main streets, not out of caution, but because she no longer expects anyone to care about what she might say. Near the remnants of the city's arena, where once the blood and sand mingled in spectacle, silence reigns. Ivy spills down the weathered walls in leafy cascades. The outer stone tiers have collapsed in parts, revealing the earth beneath. A small herd of goats picks their way between the empty seats, now sunken and moss-covered. On brighter days, children climb over the crumbled statues, imitating long-dead gladiators and tossing pebbles into the overgrown pit. But not today. Today, the arena belongs solely to the goats, silent heirs to a forgotten grandeur. The only sound is the soft clop of hooves and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. In the garden of a once prominent senator's villa, a figure sits with a blank stare. His robe is neatly folded over his lap, the embroidered trim faded to dull threads. His cup of wine is half full, its warmth long gone, untouched for hours. He watches a blackbird hop between the sparse grapevines, which now yield more withered leaves than fruit. From time to time, letters arrive from the capital, or what remains of it, detailing the continued unraveling of imperial control. Generals turned governors, legions retreating, cities changing hands. He reads them without alarm. They are like distant weather reports, describing storms he no longer believes will reach him. Inside a cramped apothecary, a young woman grinds a mixture of dried roots, bark, and ash into a paste. Her father, once the head of the shop, lies in a cot beside the hearth, breathing shallowly. He murmurs in his sleep, repeating the same phrase over and over. Fever comes. Fever stays. The girl keeps mixing. She knows the paste will not cure him, but still she prepares it. The shelves around her are nearly bare. Once they held tinctures imported from Alexandria and spices from the east. Now there are only a few jars, dried thyme, a chipped pot of vinegar, and a bottle of oil turned cloudy with age. And yet, she works, whispering a prayer to Saint Sebastian as she does. Far beyond the last rows of homes, where Ravenna gives way to swampland and scattered forest, a narrow trail curls into the gray distance. There, a faint plume of smoke rises steadily into the still morning air. It is thin, harmless. Not the black pillar of siege, but the soft breath of a campfire, maybe a family moving west, or a deserter's shelter, or a scout from one of the many tribal groups now drifting across the empire's brittle edges. No one from the city goes to meet them. No signal is sent. Whether they come in peace or not hardly matters anymore. The city's walls will stand, or they will crumble. The outcome is beyond the concern of those still inside. And so, through the broken shutters and empty squares, the wind passes like a quiet memory. Ravenna stands, not as a beacon, but as an after-image of something greater. The empire does not crash in fire or fury. It unravels in silence. The sun sits higher now, diffused through a pale, wintry haze that gives everything in Ravenna a washed-out, almost ghost-like quality. Light filters through the mist in delicate beams, touching the broken cobblestones with a kind of fragile dignity. Inside a humble workshop near the city's crumbling edge, a blacksmith moves like a man carrying not just iron, but the weight of memory. His hands, scarred and darkened from decades of work, grip the tongs with the care of a father holding a child. The forge glows weakly, its flame stoked only enough to soften small bits of metal, not large weapons or horseshoes. There's no call for weapons now, no one to wield them, no enemies to repel, no legions to supply. Instead, he crafts hinges for doors, no unlocks and nails for carts that no longer travel far. The clang of his hammer is soft, almost respectful, echoing through the empty alleys beyond his door. His latest creation, a brooch shaped like a leaf, will likely be bartered for a sack of onions or a half loaf of coarse bread. That's what craftsmanship means now. Survival, not pride. Outside, the streets wind like dry riverbeds, etched with time but emptied of momentum. Dust gathers where feet once hurried. Here and there, voices echo, not conversations but half-spoken monologues, the mutterings of people who speak out loud, just to hear something human. A cobbler works alone under an archway, hunched over a cracked wooden bench. His thread catches in the wind like a spider's web unraveling. He no longer mends soldiers' boots or elegant slippers for court officials. Now he patches children's shoes, fashions sandals from scrap leather, and sometimes just stitches for the sake of keeping his fingers moving. A child watches him from the shadows, silent, curious, clutching a wooden doll with one eye missing and a hand gnawed away. The doll's a relic now, a memory of abundance. On the steps of what was once a basilica, a young man recites psalms in Latin. His voice is steady but hollow, stripped of conviction, like the rhythm of a song long memorized but emptied of its meaning. He speaks not for a congregation, there is none, but for the pigeons that flutter down to peck at crumbs, and for the stone saints who gaze down with weathered faces and softened features. The bishop is long gone. The altar inside is draped with a cloth now faded to beige. Candles are unlit, but their wicks remain intact, hopeful in their silence. Dust coats the nave. The scent of incense has faded into the stone. Beyond the city gate, a woman walks with a jug balanced against her hip. The clay vessel is chipped, its rim uneven, but it holds water just the same. She walks slowly, not from age, but because she must ration her energy. Every step feels chosen, deliberate, carved into the earth like a prayer. Behind her, a toddler trails, barefoot on the cold stone. The child hums softly, tunelessly, a melody stitched from the air itself. They pass by a wall where old proclamations still cling. decrees from past emperors, now sun-bleached and fraying, curling at the edges like autumn leaves left too long in the wind. One torn decree announces a festival that never happened. Another lists grain prices that have since become meaningless. In a shaded courtyard, a teacher sits beneath a leafless fig tree. A few students gathered at his feet. The oldest among them cannot be more than 10. He speaks of Cicero and Virgil, his tone wistful, as though these names are friends he hopes to see again. His wax tablet is nearly worn through. The stylus he uses has been reshaped from an old spoon, its curve still faintly visible. One student, distracted, watches a snail trace a glistening path along the broken paving stones. Another tugs at a loose thread on his tunic. The words float through the air like dust motes, beautiful, but too light to settle. The knowledge passed down feels ancient, like stories whispered at the edge of a fire. Near the market square, a man with a hollowed flute plays a tune that sounds vaguely familiar. The melody weaves through the empty stalls and across the broken columns. It is a song once played at weddings and festivals, before the grain shipments stopped arriving and the baker closed his shop. A woman listens from her window, her eyes closed, lips moving along with the tune. She remembers the words, though she hasn't sung them in years. The music ends, and she returns to her sewing, patching a sheet for the third time. Each stitch, a quiet defiance against decay. And somewhere beyond all this, past the garden walls and the roads dissolving into mud and root, a procession of men in mismatched armor rides slowly toward the city. Their banners are faded, their expressions unreadable. They carry no war cry, no drums. Whether they mean to conquer or merely pass through, none can say. The people of Ravenna do not rush to meet them. They simply continue their day, preparing meals, mending garments, murmuring prayers, each task an act of quiet resistance, or perhaps resignation. These are the rituals that remain when institutions fall, the small, daily things. The empire's fall is not a thunderclap. It is the long, soft hush of voices lowering in unison. It is not the collapse of marble, but the peeling of paint, the fray of cloth, the flicker of a flame no longer fed. In Ravenna, life goes on, not because it thrives, but because it remembers how. The morning in Ravenna begins with a silence so dense it feels like a thick fog pressing against the soul. It's a silence shaped not just by the absence of sound, but by the absence of motion, the slowing heartbeat of a world once vibrant. The mist hangs lower today, draping the crumbling city like a burial shroud, muting every shape into a pale blur. The outlines of rooftops, once tall and confident, now bow under moss and erosion. Painted walls that once bore the colors of empire have faded to ghosts of ochre and red. The avenues lie deserted, their stones uneven and strewn with the remains of a market that hasn't opened in weeks. Carts that once rattled with trade goods stand abandoned under makeshift awnings, their wooden wheels swollen and cracked from rain. Horses, once the pride of military parades, graze freely where fences have long since collapsed, their ribs visible beneath mud-caked hides. In a small home tucked beside the broken colonnades of the former administrative quarter, a woman stirs beneath a patched wool blanket. Her awakening is slow, hesitant. Dreams cling to her like dew, more vivid and structured than the shapeless hours ahead. She sits up on a cot made of straw stuffed into torn fabric, each movement drawing a wince from joints stiff with cold and age. Her husband is gone, taken by illness or war, or perhaps both. The distinction no longer matters. She speaks of him less with each passing month. Alone, she lights a dull flame with flint and steel, and prepares a thin porridge from the last of her barley, stirring it gently with a spoon carved from bone, worn smooth by years of use. The steam from the pot does little to warm the room, but it gives her something to look at, a ritual to mark the morning. Across the narrow alley, A boy no older than 10 navigates the uneven stones with a bundle of kindling in his arms. His frame is too light for the weight, but he carries it with the resolve of someone who knows that warmth must be earned. He pauses near a once grand house whose wall collapsed seasons ago, revealing the interior like a cracked egg. From within the ruin, a fig tree has taken root, growing with eerie confidence through the broken floor. It bears no fruit, only curling leaves that tremble in the breeze. The boy studies it, as if asking whether trees remember the people who once sat in their shade, argued in their language, dreamed beneath their branches. He moves on, dropping splinters of wood with each step. Near the city's edge, where villas have given way to makeshift dwellings, an old man stoops in a courtyard overtaken by weeds. He pulls stubborn greens from between fallen tiles, whispering names to each one as if greeting old acquaintances. Mallow, dandelion, chickweed. These are his crops now. He plucks the healthiest leaves, careful not to disturb the snails, one of which he pockets with practiced subtlety. The garden once hosted sculptures, marble benches, and an ornate sundial. Now it hosts only silence, save for the occasional murmur of wind through drying branches. He returns to his shelter, a space barely large enough to stand in, where he will boil his harvest into a bitter soup and sit beside a fire made of twigs and hope. In the town center, a cracked and moss-covered fountain still murmurs, its voice reduced to a slow trickle. No one knows why it still works, only that it does. Built by engineers whose names have long vanished from memory, it now serves as a curiosity for passing children. 2 small figures crouch beside it, dipping hands into the cool water, giggling softly. One child soaks a square of cloth, once part of a senator's toga, the gold thread still faintly visible, using it to wipe the dust from a wooden doll. Their laughter is quiet, like the sound of leaves falling onto soft earth. Joy, in this city, feels like a dialect no longer taught but not yet forgotten. Within the skeletal remains of a hall that once held debates and decrees, a group of women patch clothes by firelight. An elder sits among them, telling stories in a low melodic voice. Her tales are stitched with empire and illusion, of emperors who crossed frozen rivers, of generals who faced down invading hordes with wit alone. No one questions the truth. The stories are not about fact. They are about endurance. A toddler dozes nearby, one hand curled around a wooden lion whose painted eyes have long since faded. The women listen, not to learn, but to remember what it felt like to believe. Near the wetlands where once prized villas now sink into decay, an old fishing boat bobs against a rotting post. Its creator died years ago, and no one has claimed it. Fish have retreated from these shallows, and the rivers are brackish with salt as the sea slowly encroaches. A heron perches on the prow, unmoving, watching with the quiet patience of something that remembers more than it reveals. The boat creaks as the wind nudges it gently, like a reminder that motion is still possible. In a shaded corner of the ancient forum, 3 young men sit cross-legged in front of a broken slab of Latin text. The engraving is chipped and worn, but they attempt to read it aloud. The words make little sense. One speaks hesitantly while the others nod as though understanding might come through rhythm alone. They discuss rewriting it into the common tongue. They have no ink, no parchment, only clay. One suggests carving it into tiles from a collapsed kiln, but the kiln is now home to a family displaced by raiders from the north. Their voices drift upward, then vanish, and far beyond the city's breath, where the land flattens into a brittle plain, lies a field where no crops are planted. It was once a training ground for soldiers. Now it is a graveyard. The markers are crude, stones arranged in circles, sticks bound with twine, scratched symbols that no longer match any book. A woman kneels at one such mound. She does not cry. She places a shell on the soil and whispers something to the air, as if the wind might carry it to someone who once listened. Ravenna exhales differently now, not with the strength of empire, but with the rhythm of things that survive by adapting. Its people live in a dream, not a vision of grandeur, but a fog of continuity. They keep rituals. They share food. They whisper stories. This is not a dramatic collapse, but a long fading, a candle running low. The Roman Empire did not fall in one night. It settled into dust, into silence, into hands still working, still remembering, still hoping. In the southern hills beyond Ravenna, where the forests grow thick with tangled bramble and memory, a single road weaves through the pines, narrow, uneven, and crumbling under centuries of weight. Once, it connected outposts, supply lines, and marching legions. Today, it connects forgotten farmsteads and the ghosts of empires. Along its edges, ancient stone milestones still stand, though the numerals etched into their faces have faded into rough, moss-covered suggestions. Their meaning is lost to time, read only by ivy and wind. Carts rarely pass this way now, and when they do, the sound of wooden wheels and creaking axles seems to disturb even the birds, who pause their flight as though listening to something they half remember but can no longer name. A donkey pulls one such cart this morning, its pace steady but slow. The animal's hide is matted with old dust, and its breath steams faintly in the cool air. The driver, a middle-aged man wrapped in layers of sun-faded cloth, squints toward the horizon. His beard is grizzled, his hands cracked and dark with soil. He is the kind of man who has lived through winters that never ended and summers that never quite began. He sells firewood, pine resin, and dried herbs to those who still trade in coin, or more often now, in barter. A pair of worn sandals dangle from his belt. His bare feet press into the splintered wood beneath him, toughened by years of walking on roads that have forgotten their purpose. He hums a tune without words, a melody his mother once sang before her voice gave out, back when the empire still held shape and rules. Behind him, a child rides in the back of the cart, nestled among bundles of kindling and baskets filled with dried nettles. The child is quiet, eyes wide, clutching a small carved figurine of Mercury. The nose is chipped, and the wings on its helmet are worn smooth, but it is still identifiable to those who still know the old gods. It was found near an old villa, half buried in the soil near a fountain that no longer ran and whose basin now hosts frogs and fallen leaves. The figurine was a toy, perhaps, or maybe a talisman, once held in a soldier's kit, a merchant's pouch, or the pocket of someone long gone. The child doesn't know. It simply feels important, worth holding on to, worth remembering. The road passes the ruins of a way station, roof collapsed, windows gaping like sockets without eyes. Ivy spills from every corner, draping the structure like a funeral shroud. Here, once, riders changed mounts, and messengers paused for bread and cheese, wine and news. A sign still hangs on a rusted chain above the doorway, the paint peeled and unreadable. The man does not stop. He has passed this place many times before and no longer looks inside. He knows it is empty, except for a pair of owls who roost in the rafters and watch travelers like silent feathered judges from another age. By midday, the sun peeks through the canopy in broken shards of gold. The forest floor is a patchwork of shadow and light, flickering like memory itself. The man pulls the cart to a halt beside a shallow stream, its banks cluttered with stone fragments, broken amphorae, and bits of tile glazed in forgotten patterns. He lets the donkey drink while he kneels to fill a gourd. The water is cold and tastes faintly of iron and moss. He does not mind. He has tasted worse. In the shade nearby, the child eats a handful of boiled grain from a cloth pouch. The figurine rests beside them, watching with blank, indifferent eyes. Across the stream, a stone arch still stands. Barely. It was once part of a bridge, but the rest has long since crumbled and fallen into the water. Vines twist through the stones like veins, and moss blurs the edge between craft and wilderness. Carved into its base is a half-visible inscription. The man cannot read it. Latin, they say, but even those who once knew it have forgotten the finer meanings. Now it is just decoration for the wind and the lichen, a whisper of a language that once commanded armies and recorded laws. Farther up the road, a shepherd leans on a crooked staff, watching over a thin flock of sheep that graze more from habit than abundance. He nods as the cart approaches, but says nothing. They've crossed paths before, exchanged dried apples once and a lump of wax another time. Words are sparse currency in these hills, and silence speaks fluently. The man raises a hand. The shepherd responds in kind. The flock shifts restlessly, their bells faint and irregular, like forgotten chimes blown off rhythm by time. As the cart moves on, the child points to a fallen statue lying half buried in the undergrowth, a torso with no arms, a face eroded into anonymity. The man slows, studies it for a breath, then moves on. They are everywhere now, these broken testaments. The land has become a museum without caretakers, a graveyard without eulogies. Pieces of marble and bronze sprout from the earth like fossils, like memories that refuse to stay buried. When dusk approaches, the man lights a small lantern with a wick soaked in animal fat. The cart creaks along the road, shadows stretching long behind them like stories no longer told. They will sleep beneath the stars tonight, near a field where barley once grew, now overtaken by scrub, nettles, and silence. The child rests their head on a sack of straw, and the man watches the horizon, where the last light slips behind the mountains like a curtain, closing on a play long forgotten. He does not speak, but he remembers, not with clarity, but with sensation. The sound of soldiers' boots on stone, the clang of metal and the cry of vendors, the smell of fresh bread from the market, the voice of an orator in a city square. All gone now, all dissolved into forest and fog and the slow rumble of wheels over broken stone. And still the road goes on. The morning fog settles in an almost deliberate hush along the broken road, thick and unmoving, as if reluctant to give way to the pale, indecisive sunlight struggling to crest the low hills on the horizon. In a forgotten village, its name long since erased from memory and absent from even the most ancient maps, people begin their day with the slow rhythm of habit more than hope. There are no roosters here to greet the dawn, only the creaking groan of warped wooden shutters pushed open by weather-worn hands, and the faint rustle of cloaks pulled tighter against the wet, creeping chill that lingers well past sunrise. The village has grown from the bones of a Roman estate, its center formed around what used to be a proud courtyard, now wild with overgrowth. Weeds claw through broken flagstones, and a once graceful public fountain now serves as a mossy, cracked trough for goats that wander freely through the ruins. Crumbling columns still stand like defiant ghosts, one of them bearing the half-erased relief of Minerva, her face hollowed out by centuries of rain and wind. Inside one of the more intact stone dwellings, a squat house with a roof patched in layers of straw, clay, and broken tiles scavenged from forgotten buildings, an elderly woman tends a low-burning clay stove. Her hands, stiffened by age and hard labor, move with the mechanical precision of long habit, feeding thin slivers of bark and pieces of peat into the fire's hungry mouth. She's nearly blind in one eye and hears little from her left, but she performs her morning tasks with unwavering focus. Her granddaughter sits nearby, legs crossed on a stool made from a discarded millstone, quietly binding sprigs of rosemary with twine. The scent is pungent, clean, and strong, one of the last familiar sensations that anchors them to a past that grows increasingly blurred. Outside, a young boy walks carefully back from the stream, balancing a heavy wooden pail in both arms. It leaks slowly, leaving a thin trail in the dusty earth behind him. He's been scolded often about wasting water. Once, an aqueduct delivered it effortlessly from the hills, a marvel of Roman engineering that spanned miles in solemn arches. But time and neglect have cracked it in too many places. Now, villagers reinforce the surviving spans with rope, scavenged timber, and whatever nails they can repurpose. It's a hopeless project, but they do it anyway. because that's what people do in a world that's still falling apart. Near the outskirts, a crumbling wall outlines a small shrine. Its niches once held offerings to the lairs and penates, the household gods that were once venerated daily. Now, chickens gather there instead, scratching among the worn stones. The names of those gods are barely remembered, spoken only by the eldest in idle curses or whispered blessings. For the children, they're little more than old stories, blurred tales of monsters in the woods or the great fire that destroyed a city over the hill. Was it war, plague, or the judgment of the heavens? No one knows. No one really asks. People left, and they never came back. A man works steadily at the forge, hammering a strip of salvaged iron to mend a wagon axle. He wears a cloak heavy with soot and leather, and his fingers are blackened from years of work. The forge occupies the ruins of an old Roman bathhouse. Its once pristine pool is now dry and half filled with rubble. Stone benches hold baskets of nails and coils of rope instead of clean towels. Faded inscriptions carved in Latin still cling to the lintel above the door, promising health, leisure, and glory to the patrons of ages past. The man cannot read them. No one in the village can. Their economy is mostly barter now. A good repair earns salted meat or a few skeins of wool. Money is rare and comes in a mismatched collection of coins. Roman denarii, worn smooth and almost featureless, mixed with even older currency whose origins no one can identify. They pass from hand to hand like relics, valued more for their feel than their worth. The priest, once a traveler himself, emerges from a small hut that was once a grain store. His robe is old and patched, the faded brown fabric repaired with lengths of blue thread. In his hand, he carries a wooden staff topped with a crude cross. He recites morning prayers in halting Latin, mangled by years and mispronunciations. His congregation is small. Most come not out of piety, but for the comfort of a shared space. He conducts baptisms and burials, blesses fields before planting, and tells the villagers stories about saints whose lives often echo the myths of older gods. The villagers nod politely. They don't press the contradictions. A stranger arrives today, lean and road-weary. His boots are ragged and his cloak patched in mismatched colors, but his eyes are alert. He carries a satchel filled with brittle scrolls and worn books, heavy with knowledge. His Latin is formal, almost musical, and he speaks of distant cities where council halls still echo with debates, of coastal markets where ships still trade spices and silk, of cathedrals so tall they seem to touch heaven itself. The villagers listen. Some nod. Most simply stare. They've never gone farther than the old road to the valley's edge. That night, the community gathers in what used to be the estate's meeting hall, a space once defined by marble benches and mosaic floors, now roofless and open to the cold starlight. The traveler tells of Rome's fall, of a city sacked, of flames in temples and statues toppled by angry crowds. He names emperors lost to time. A few villagers murmur recognition. Most don't. The names drift like wind. They sit quietly, the firelight playing across tired faces, some captivated, others merely grateful for the warmth and company. Above them, the stars stretch wide and endless. And in the shadows of a ruined temple, its altar now a home for nesting birds. An old owl watches without blinking, silent, still, bearing witness as the echo of an empire continues to fade, moment by moment, into the dense and eternal forest of sleep. The night passed quietly, blanketed in a hush so complete that even the owls seemed reluctant to stir the silence. Only the wind moved freely, slipping between the ancient trees like a phantom, rustling branches that had once shaded soldiers, kings, and drifters. These woods had watched empires rise and crumble. They had heard the roars of armies and the sighs of widows. And now, they listened once more, as a village, caught between past and future, slowly exhaled into another dawn. In the dim haze of morning, before the sun had claimed the sky, the people of the village began to stir. Fires were kindled, smoke curling into the pale blue light, and the smell of wood smoke mixed with the damp earth. This place, neither fully Roman nor truly free from Rome's long shadow, clung to a fragile rhythm. Life was no longer dictated by edicts from marble halls, yet it was shaped still by roads, ruins, and rituals left behind. These people lived in a world that had forgotten its authors. At the edge of the village where the human world gave way to wilderness, a man moved through the underbrush. He was a hunter by trade, though in truth he was more a scavenger of opportunity. Today he hunted rabbits. Tomorrow it might be mushrooms, or if the gods willed it, a boar too clumsy to escape. His bow creaked with age, its grip polished by years of use. The arrows were an odd collection, some sharp, some blunt, fletched with feathers from birds he no longer remembered catching. Still, they did their work. He moved quietly, weaving between trees, the earth soft beneath his steps. He paused near a clearing, once the site of a Roman outpost. Its walls, long since reduced to crumbling stone, lay cloaked in ivy and moss. On some nights he swore he heard voices there, Latin spoken low and formal, like the recitation of forgotten laws. It didn't frighten him. If anything, it made him feel less alone. Farther out, a shepherd guided a restless flock of goats up into the hills. Rain had turned the lower fields to marsh, drowning the pastures in thick, clinging mud. The higher slopes were thinner in grass, but safer. From that height, the shepherd could see the valley stretched wide and tired, with lines etched by time. The old Roman road ran through it, a once proud artery of empire, now broken and uneven like a scar that refused to heal. His father had once walked that road as a young man. He spoke of a city at its end, one with towers, fountains, and strange fruits he could never quite describe. But that was long ago. No one had come down the road in 2 years, maybe more. In the village center, the traveler who had arrived just before dusk stood under a makeshift awning. The old bathhouse where he'd slept still held the warmth of its ancient stones, but the cold crept in through the cracks. He cupped his hands, breathed warmth into them, and waited. Slowly, villagers emerged, their faces cautious but curious. First children came, as children often do, drawn by something unfamiliar. Then a few elders, leaning on sticks and memory. Then the rest, laborers, mothers, a priest who stood near but not too near. They came not just to look, but to listen. The traveler's satchel was open again. From it he pulled scrolls, trinkets, fragments of stories. A coin bearing the worn face of an emperor no one could name. A shard of tile painted with sea creatures. A piece of glass that caught the morning light and scattered it like flame. He spoke in Latin, soft, measured, with an accent pulled from many places. He told them stories that didn't feel like stories at all, but rather like dreams half remembered. He spoke of a time when Rome ruled not only with armies but with ideas, when men in togas debated laws that governed lands beyond mountains and seas, when water flowed uphill through aqueducts, and maps were drawn not with guesses, but with purpose. He told them how it ended not in fire, but in silence. Misrule, betrayal, hunger, invasion, and forgetting. These were the tools of Rome's undoing. The villagers listened. Some sat cross-legged in the dirt. Others leaned against the remnants of a column. A few simply closed their eyes and let the words wrap around them like a warm cloth. The priest watched from the shadow of a leaning wall. His arms were crossed, his mouth tight. These tales hovered too close to old beliefs and dangerous pride. But he said nothing. Deep down, perhaps, even he felt the pull of what was lost. Elsewhere, a woman crouched among the ruins of what had once been a library, stones blackened by fire, and time still stood in solemn silence. She combed through the grass and rubble, her eyes searching not for food or coin, but for pieces of a world she had never known. Her fingers brushed against a shard of pottery, curved and painted with symbols. She could not read them, but she touched them like they mattered. Like they remembered her. Even if she could not remember them, she placed the fragment gently into her pouch, beside dried herbs and polished stones. One day, she hoped, their meaning might return. By midday, the sun broke through, scattering the clouds like petals. The light fell on patched roofs and crooked walls, on fences made from cartwheels and doors held shut with vines. And in that fleeting brilliance, the village did not look broken. It looked alive. Children ran barefoot, laughing through the weeds. A boy swung a dulled sword at imagined enemies, while a girl tied ribbons into a donkey's mane. The traveler sat beneath his awning, copying lines of Virgil into fresh parchment, his fingers ink-stained and careful. He whispered the words aloud, not to himself, but to the air, as if hoping someone would carry them forward. There were no emperors in this village, no legions, no golden eagles, no laws etched in stone. But there was memory. And in memory something stirred. Not a ghost, not quite a god, but the faint breath of an old world, waiting to be remembered again. The afternoon light softened as it filtered through a gauze of high clouds, casting the village in a pale, gentle glow that stretched across rooftops, worn cobblestones, and the slowly wilting wildflowers at the edge of town. The day had grown still, as if even the breeze had paused to listen. Not a single dog barked. Not a crow called. Even the animals seemed to sense something different in the air, some unspoken shift beneath the surface of things, a hush that fell without ceremony or warning. The blacksmith's hammer, once ringing with a rhythm that anchored the village's mornings in sound and certainty, now rested beside the hearth like a relic. The forge had gone cold, not from disuse, but from uncertainty. No new orders had come for tools or repairs. The last merchant had passed through seasons ago, promising to return. He had not. The road he left on had grown over at the edges, dusted with weeds, as if trying to forget the sound of wheels. Inside the blacksmith's home, his daughter carefully stitched a tear in her father's only good tunic, the one he once wore to the solstice gatherings, back when such things still happened. Her fingers worked methodically, not with urgency, but with the kind of patience learned from years of doing much, with little, from learning that everything could be made to last just a little longer. She hummed a tune older than she could name, a melody her mother once sang while kneading dough or brushing her hair by firelight. It had no words and needed none. It drifted out into the still air, weaving through the timbers and into the dirt lane outside, like a ghost too gentle to haunt. On that lane, a cart stood tilted to one side, its axle cracked from age and strain, splintered like a bone left too long in the cold. The wheel beside it had been mended so many times it resembled a mosaic more than a circle. The man who owned it sat nearby on an overturned bucket, chewing slowly on a piece of dried apple, eyes half-lidded against the afternoon light. He was not in a hurry to fix it. He might later, or he might not. There was nowhere urgent left to go, and little left to carry. He watched the children play in the dust and wondered if they even knew what the cart had once meant. Movement, commerce, news from other lands. Now it was just a thing that broke, like so many others, and was left where it fell. By the well, 3 women gathered, their voices low, rising and falling like waves on a quiet shore. They spoke of the travelers' tales, each retelling slightly different than the last, embroidered with guesses and borrowed phrases. One swore he had said Rome's fall began with a poisoned wine passed at a feast. Another insisted it was the gods' punishment for pride, for towering statues and temples too grand for their own good. The third, older and more skeptical, said she'd heard a story like that before, from a soldier fleeing some battle no one remembered the name of. But even she listened closely as the others spoke, her hands busy tying herbs into bundles, her ears clinging to the memory of the traveler's voice, deep and weary. In a shaded corner near the edge of the village, a young boy crouched beside a patch of bare earth. Using a smooth stick, he drew lines and shapes, some of them letters he had seen on the traveler's scrolls, others borrowed from his dreams. He didn't know what they meant, not exactly, but copying them made him feel connected to something larger, to the idea that these marks had power, that long ago people had written them to remember, to rule, to dream. He traced a perfect arc, then scratched it out and tried again. This time, he whispered a name to it, his own. And for a moment, it felt like creation. Beyond the boy, farther out where the forest began again, the old woman who tended the shrine knelt among stones. The shrine itself was hardly more than a circle of rocks and a broken statue, half swallowed by vines and weather, its face long eroded. But she treated it with reverence. Each morning she placed fresh flowers there, whatever she could gather. Violets, thistles, sometimes weeds she thought might still count. Each night she lit a small fire beside it, letting the smoke carry prayers she never spoke aloud. No one else came anymore. The gods were not forgotten exactly, just set aside. But she remembered. And as long as she did, the shrine lived, in its quiet way, hidden and enduring. Overhead a hawk circled, gliding on unseen currents. It passed silently above the village, above the ruined bathhouse with its cracked tile mosaics, the worn road that once led to markets and ports, the bent spire of a chapel whose bell no longer rang except in dreams. From that height, the land looked almost whole. You couldn't see the cracks in the stone or the wear in the cloth. You could only see the shape of things, the patchwork fields, the winding paths, the rhythm of life that continued even after the empire that once gave it order had disappeared. Even broken, it persisted. And as the light faded again, stretching shadows long and thin across the ground like fingers reaching for something lost, the traveler sat in quiet thought. He had not spoken since morning. The scrolls remained rolled, the satchel closed. But his eyes watched everything. The smith's quiet forge, the boy's drawn letters, the fire at the shrine. He saw a world not ending, but becoming something else. Slower, quieter, rougher perhaps, but not gone. Just changed, transformed by absence and shaped by memory. He reached into his bag and withdrew a single piece of parchment, blank and waiting. He set it on his lap, uncorked a bottle of ink, and began to write. Not a record, not a warning, but something else entirely. A kind of remembering, a way of saying, we were here, we lived, we lost, and still, we remain, and always, we will. The sun was lower now, casting a long golden streak across the land like a slow-moving tide of light retreating into shadow, washing over the quiet village with the melancholy gentleness of a fading song. The houses, built of stone and timber, leaned into one another as if trying to hold each other up, as if straining to remember what it once felt like to be filled with laughter, with arguments, with footsteps echoing through narrow alleys. There were no calls from traders, no clang of hammers against iron, no rustle of fabric at the market stalls. Only the sighing of wind through tall grass, growing thick and wild, where once feet had trodden the earth bare. The silence wasn't hollow. It pressed in from every side, thick and full, pulsing with stories unsaid, with dreams once spoken aloud, now absorbed into the soil and stone. The air seemed to hum with memory, with echoes too faint to call back, too stubborn to disappear. A potter stood in the dim threshold of her workshop, clay dried and cracking on her hands, staring at the neat row of bowls that hadn't moved in weeks. The shelves that once held objects meant for feasts, for gifts, for the communion of daily life, now collected only dust and cobweb. She reached for one, the glaze catching the last of the sunlight in a swirl of ocean blue, and turned it slowly in her palm. She imagined it full of stew or bread, or the wine of celebration, and wondered if somewhere in Rome, in the days before the fall, someone had done the same. Had they shared a meal, passed this shape from hand to hand, debating politics, quoting poets, lamenting the plague? Or had they too known a time when usefulness faded and beauty became an unanswered question? She set it back on the shelf, her thumb leaving a faint print in the dust, a mark that might be mistaken for purpose. Around her, motes of clay and memory danced in the warm air like gentle snowfall, settling into a stillness too heavy to disturb. By the riverbank, once a bustling artery of trade and travel, a fisherman sat beneath a bent and weather-worn tree. His lines were cast not with the hope of catching fish, but with the pull of something deeper, something older. He didn't expect trout or carp. He fished for the sensation of waiting, for the rhythm of ripples on the surface, for the slow unraveling of time. He remembered stories told by his father and his father before, of boats with sails like wings, of barges that carried spices, oil, and whispers from distant shores. Now the water flowed muddy and slow, its voice a quiet mumble that barely stirred the reeds. The banks had grown wild and soft, claiming footpaths and fields, swallowing the outline of roads that once knew wheels and hooves. He watched the surface for hours, the lines swaying gently like a pendulum ticking toward a time no longer relevant. On the hillside, a watchtower that once rose proud and clear-eyed over the valley had slumped into a broken silhouette. Its upper half crumbled, its stones cracked and shifting with each passing season. Ivy twisted through its wounds, hugging the ancient blocks like a bandage. The horn once used to signal danger, invasion, or triumph lay forgotten and split at the base, now repurposed by a child who scooped water with it, unaware of its once dire tones. No guards remained, no orders were shouted, no fire burned in its hearth, and yet the view endured, unbothered and vast, looking out across a landscape painted in dusk, tree lines like ink strokes, distant ridges fading into shadow, and far off, the faintest scar of an old Roman road. Beneath moss and fallen leaves, the stones still whispered of purpose, of connection, of journeys that had long since ended. Inside the chapel, where prayers had once rung like bells through the air, silence lingered like incense. The windows cast shafts of light that caught dust in golden beams, like relics of sunlight suspended in time. A few candles flickered on the altar, left there by unseen hands. Their glow was small, defiant, trembling. The altar itself, worn by generations of knees and fingers, still bore the marks of devotion, chiseled crosses, curling vines, a bird with open wings. A man stood at its edge, bowing not out of habit or ritual, but in quiet respect. He didn't speak. He reached out and touched the stone lightly, as one might touch a memory. Then he placed a coin, tarnished and nearly forgotten, upon the surface, and turned to leave. Outside, the chapel's stone walls breathed the cooling air, and he walked into the twilight as if slipping out of a dream, his form shrinking into the long shadow of the evening. In a modest house near the empty square, a woman sat by a table, unfurling a scroll with the care of someone handling fragile bones. The parchment flaked and threatened to break with each movement. Her hands, worn with age, traced the words not to read them, but to feel them, to make contact with a world that had once believed it could write permanence. The Latin was faded, but she didn't need her eyes to understand. She had memorized it long ago. Decrees, lineage, fragments of law and custom. Not because they still had authority, but because they had once been believed. She lit a candle and held it close. Its flame made the text shimmer, made the past seem briefly alive again, flickering, resisting the dark. As the day surrendered to night, the village curled inward. Birds fell silent first, then the crickets. Even the wind, which had whispered all day through broken beams and wild hedges, seemed to grow still. Shadows gathered like soft fabric around doorways, draping the world in hush. Lamps were lit, small flickering lights that pushed gently against the dark. They were not lit in defiance, but in offering, a gesture of warmth in a world that no longer asked much of them. The village breathed in and out, as it had for years now, quietly, steadily, remembering not with words, but with silence. There were no declarations of collapse, no announcements of finality. Empires do not fall all at once. They end in the pause between stories, in the empty chair at a table, in the objects left behind. And here, in this soft, glowing hush, they linger. Not loudly, not clearly, but enough. The last traces of daylight surrendered slowly to the quiet embrace of night, casting a hush that seemed to mute even the thoughts of those still awake. The village, tucked into the folds of an aging empire's forgotten reach, settled into a darkness so complete and soft that it blurred the line between sky and earth. The moon rose without ceremony, swollen and pale, brushing its muted glow across thatched rooftops and overgrown fields. Its light shimmered like a dream barely remembered, a faded after-image of a world once illuminated by ambition and decree. There were no more galloping couriers, no banners flapped against the wind, no horns called people to assemble. That age had passed. What was left was a gentler cadence, a life not driven by conquest or proclamation, but by the simple pulse of continuation. Within a crumbling house, the walls bowed slightly inward from years of shifting ground. An old man sat by a fire that crackled more for comfort than necessity. His hands, gnarled with age and memory, moved steadily over a sword long past its prime. The blade, dulled and scarred, held no promise of defense or offense. Yet he sharpened it still, not out of readiness, but ritual. It was the motion, the ghost of muscle memory, that tethered him to another time. Once he had known structure, orders given and obeyed, units formed in precision, days punctuated by drills and marches. Now, there was only the rhythm of stone against steel, a solitary echo of a vanished world. He did not expect a call to arms. There were no more calls, but still he honed the blade, each pass along the whetstone a quiet defiance against forgetting. Across the lane, in a house that creaked when the wind shifted, a young mother hummed softly over her sleeping child. Her voice was thin and worn, but carried with it a texture of comfort rooted in something ancient. She did not sing the words as they once were sung. The verses were fragments, drifting remnants of hymns once learned beside grand fires and echoing chambers. Yet the hums stitched a sense of peace through the rafters. Her child, wrapped in layers of worn wool patched by hands long gone, knew only the sound of safety. To the mother, each note was a quiet promise, a connection to ancestors who once danced and prayed and built lives beneath the structure of a proud civilization. The songs were nearly forgotten, yet their shadows lived on in breath and lullaby. Beyond the edge of the village, past the last of the crooked fences where once tamed lands had gone wild, a young boy roamed with a crooked stick, his eyes filled with the kind of wonder that flourishes in silence. He drew symbols in the dirt, spirals, stars, the outlines of wolves and ships and warriors. These were not taught. No instructor had led him. No written tale guided his hand. The shapes came from instinct, from a half-remembered echo passed down in silence. To him, the world was still vast and possible. When his gaze wandered toward the rubble that had once been a forum, the broken stone steps overtaken by ivy and moss, he imagined voices filling the air, words debating, echoing off columns now collapsed. He didn't know what the words emperor or senate truly meant. He only knew the way silence made space for stories to bloom. Deep beneath one of the few stone foundations still intact, in a cellar once stocked with salted meat and preserved grain, a forgotten cache of scrolls lay undisturbed. Time had warped the wood around them. Moisture had crept along the corners, and insects had claimed their share. But the heart of the collection, tightly bound scrolls bearing wax seals, some stamped with the sigils of long-dead officials, remained untouched. They carried the breath of another age. Decrees, census counts, letters between magistrates, maps of roads that now led nowhere. The ink, though faded, still clung to the vellum. No one had read them in years. No one might again. Yet they lingered, quiet and whole, holding their shape against rot and silence. They were the bones of memory, tucked away beneath the skin of the present. High above, beyond even the tallest hill, the sky unfolded with stars that neither moved nor dimmed for the end of any empire. They shimmered coldly, not according to any human calendar, unshaped by rituals that had once measured them. Still, someone watched. A shepherd on a ridge, a child at a window, an elder half asleep by a dying fire. Eyes found those stars, not with certainty, but with yearning. Though their names were no longer taught, and their risings no longer celebrated with chants or festivals, they continued. And the people, scattered and half aware, continued to look up. The empire had vanished, its legions gone, its columns shattered, its rule dissolved. But not everything had faded. The will to observe, to preserve, to make meaning, it remained, flickering like a lamp carefully shielded from the wind, fragile yet unextinguished, waiting to be kindled anew. At the break of dawn, in a landscape no longer watched over by legions or mapped by imperial decree, a thin haze of mist clung to the low hills like breath held in uncertainty. The valleys stretched wide and quiet, dotted with scattered clusters of dwellings, their rooftops a patchwork of wood, clay, and straw, some patched with woven reeds and moss, evidence of a stubborn will to endure. Birds, unhurried by human command, moved through the pale light in erratic formations. There were no processions echoing through stone corridors, no merchants bustling through city gates, no rising columns of smoke from distant forts signaling the start of day. Instead, the land seemed paused, as though the very air awaited something that would never come. Here, on what had once been the proud frontier of greatness, time moved not by edicts or calendars, but by seasons, by the moods of the sky, by instinct, by the low pulse of survival. In the heart of a village built from the remnants of another era, a stone pillar leaned crookedly against the wind, its surface worn smooth by generations of hands, of rain, of neglect, and small reverence. Children played near it, unconcerned with its meaning, using it as a makeshift balance beam, a shadow marker, or a place to draw games in the dust with sticks. To them, it was a curiosity, a landmark, nothing more. But long ago, it had held a plaque of bronze. An inscription, now lost to rust and theft, had named a man of title and power, had praised his gifts to the empire, had promised his name would echo in eternity. The promise, like the plaque, had faded, yet the pillar remained and the children played, their laughter echoing in a place where once commands had barked and orders been issued, softening the hard silence of history with the unknowing joy of the present. Inside one of the larger homes, where 3 generations shared the warmth of a central hearth built from salvaged bricks, a woman ground grain by hand. Her movements were steady, practiced, and almost silent, save for the rhythmic scraping of stone on stone, a sound that had likely echoed unchanged for centuries. Beside her, her father whispered a prayer in a tongue his own father had spoken fluently, though he himself now only half understood. The words stumbled at times, but their tone carried reverence and memory. It was not for the gods of the old empire. Those names had long fallen from daily speech and practice. It was a prayer for health, for harvest, for peace. Across the room, The woman's son shaped small figures from clay, arranging them into rows like soldiers or animals. When he looked up, it was not toward temples or statues. He looked at the adults, their worn faces lined by wind and worry, their hands marked by labor. They were his lineage now, his pantheon, his connection to the past and future alike. In a nearby grove, where olive trees twisted upward like reaching arms and the wind sang low songs through their leaves, a man carved into bark, not letters he did not know how to write, but symbols he had learned from his grandfather, circles, lines, marks that once formed part of an alphabet. They meant little now, but carving them gave him calm. It connected him to something greater than himself, something he could not name, something that hummed below the surface of memory. He did not know the exact year, nor the name of the last emperor. He could not point to Rome on a map, but he knew that stories had once traveled these lands like pilgrims or traders along roads now overgrown, and he believed, quietly, stubbornly, that they still did. That somewhere, buried beneath the weeds and silence, Rome had left fingerprints no storm could wash away. Further out, where the terrain sloped downward toward a river choked with reeds and the call of herons, the bones of a collapsed villa lay half submerged in soil and creeping vines. Wildflowers grew through the gaps in its flagstones, and ivy traced the outlines of forgotten mosaics. Bees moved through the air with purpose. No one visited the place anymore. The once grand structure had fallen decades ago, its tiled roofs shattered, its walls broken, its owners long gone. Its wealth had been redistributed not by decree but by wind and weather, but in its ruin, birds nested. Foxes made their dens beneath fallen beams. The world, unbothered by titles or architecture, had taken the villa back, and in doing so, it had not destroyed memory. It had absorbed it, folded it into the wild, and let it rest. In a corner of the village square, where trade once passed from hand to hand with clinks of coin and shouted prices in Latin, a small gathering took shape each week. Farmers brought extra bundles of leeks or onions. A potter brought chipped wares. A woman brought dyed thread. No one bartered with weights or scales. They simply exchanged. A sack of grain for a woven blanket. A clay bowl for a day's help in the fields. The transactions carried no ceremony, no bureaucracy, and yet they formed a kind of order, a rhythm older than the empire that had once tried to formalize it. This was not economy by decree. It was economy by necessity, sustained by trust, by memory, by the need to share and survive. It was commerce without coins, and it worked. Elsewhere, in a shelter made of stone and earth and bramble, a woman knelt by a mound of herbs spread across worn cloth. She was neither priestess nor physician, but people came to her with questions, for coughs, for fevers, for childbirth, and for death. She answered with poultices, with ash and honey, with roots crushed beneath river stones and words murmured over boiling water. Her knowledge had no formal pedigree. It had been passed from mother to daughter, remembered in gestures, reinforced by trial and correction. Her remedies were a blend of intuition and memory, and though she did not wear robes or command sanctuaries, she was respected. In a world no longer governed by Rome's authority, hers was a quieter form of power, one woven into the bones of the land and the breath of its people. Beneath the canopy of a fading empire, life pressed forward, not in marches or decrees, but in footsteps across meadows, in hands passing bread, in songs hummed at dusk and names whispered in the dark. The fall of Rome had not erased the people. It had merely unspooled the thread that once bound them all in a single name, a single center. Now they lived by the loom of daily living, weaving their own meanings into the fabric of a world forever altered yet never entirely lost. And in that quiet, in that persistence, history did not end. It changed shape. At the edge of a dimming forest where the last breath of empire gave way to the quiet persistence of wilderness, a soft wind stirred the leaves like a whispered memory from a world that had once shouted with triumph and conquest. Now, The only sounds were those of nature reclaiming its dominion. Distant birds calling through the canopy, the rustle of small animals in the brush, and the creak of ancient trees swaying gently in the fading light. This forest, once pruned and patrolled as the outermost fringe of Roman order, had grown wild again. Roads laid down by legionnaires had softened into earthen tracks, nearly swallowed by moss, fallen leaves, and centuries of disregard. What had once been named, measured, and inscribed into maps now existed only in the breath of wind and the memory of roots that broke through stone. A young man, barefoot and clothed in a simple, roughly spun wool tunic, moved slowly through the underbrush. He carried a woven reed basket and picked his way with careful deliberation, gathering mushrooms, herbs, and roots. His gestures were precise, honed by a life that knew no books, no tutors, no scrolls of parchment, only the language of earth and season. He paused often, not from fear but from knowledge. A low bend in a tree meant water nearby. The thickness of moss underfoot warned of marshland. The buzzing of flies hinted at ripe fruit or a carcass best avoided. Every step was a quiet testament to inherited wisdom, a kind passed from voice to ear, gesture to hand, over generations. When he returned to the small clearing where his family's home sat, a squat, low stone structure capped with sod, peat, and bark, he bore the day's harvest in silence, greeted not by cheers or expectation, but by the familiar rhythm of life continuing. There were no taxes to report, no tribute to render. Rome had not fallen for him. It had faded like morning mist, leaving behind the same needs and labors it had tried, and failed, to control. Nearby, his sister worked at an old loom. The wooden frame, sun-bleached and worn smooth, still bore faint carvings, half-erased marks perhaps left by its Roman maker, or the tally scratches of years long forgotten. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, passing the shuttle back and forth, rhythmically beating the threads into linen. Each length of fabric was a continuation of work older than empire, handed down not in writing, but in repetition. Her feet moved the treadles in time to a soft, humming tune, an ancient melody with no known beginning, preserved not in manuscripts, but in memories and lullabies sung beneath open skies. Sitting beneath the shade of a knotted tree was their grandfather, his back against the bark, his eyes pale and cloudy with the weight of time. He gazed up at the branches above, watching the play of light and shadow, as if searching for something written in the rustling canopy. His memories of Rome were neither gilded nor bitter, just facts folded into the seasons. He remembered the grain shipments, the market stalls with their foreign goods, the soldiers who passed through with polished armor and unspoken tension. The empire had been a distant authority, more presence than protector, more weight than warmth. When it vanished, he did not weep. His world had always been this patch of land, this family, these cycles of planting and harvesting. Rome had been a sound carried on the wind, and now it was gone. A short climb up the nearby hill revealed two children, boys no older than 7 or 8, who had found a rusted, dented helmet in the weeds. They took turns wearing it, their laughter ringing through the long grass as they played their game of soldiers and kings. They didn't know the name of the man who'd once worn it, nor the war it might have seen. It mattered little. To them, it was a crown of make-believe, a relic stripped of its original meaning and infused with new stories. Their joy was no less profound than the processions once held in marble forums. In their play, fragments of history lived on, not as doctrine or record, but as imagination. The stream at the edge of the clearing, once bridged with Roman stone, flowed as it always had. The bridge had crumbled, its blocks carried off to become part of farm walls, hearths, and sheds. But the water ran cold and clear, same as ever. It fed the fields, cooled foreheads, and whispered its own eternal song. Rome had neither summoned nor stilled it. And when the last governor vanished and the legions no longer marched, the stream kept flowing, unbothered by politics. In the rhythm of that stream, in the rustle of leaves, in the hiss of bread baking over coals, life went on, without decrees, without censuses, without temples echoing the names of emperors. There was simply survival. The collapse of the empire had not been a single moment, a fiery spectacle, but a long exhale, a slow retreat of walls and standards, leaving behind people who had never truly belonged to it. They did not write about the fall of Rome. They planted turnips, repaired roofs, tended goats. The fall was not an event, it was an absence filled by continuation. As the sun dipped behind the western trees, shadows stretched long over the field. The people gathered, not in panic, not in grief, but in familiarity. Fires were lit. Smoke curled gently into the sky. Meals were made, stories were told, songs were hummed. There were no legions left, no roads patrolled, no imperial edicts read aloud. Yet there was still warmth, still purpose. Rome had faded into history, but humanity remained in quiet, in work, in the small, stubborn beauty of enduring. And so the world turned, not back, not forward, but onward. Beneath the twilight sky, with stars rising like old truths, the people lived, not as Romans, not as subjects of empire, but as themselves, quietly, continuously, enough.